links that caught my attention. So Kubernetes, a package in having something to do with Kubernetes, Kubernetes L, an Emacs package for managing Kubernetes clusters, got owned, and it got owned by a pwn request. And I'd heard of this, but I've really got to look into it again and get a more clear idea how it works. This is not a new vulnerability. Here's a blog from GitHub from 2021 explaining it. But actually now this explanation made sense to me. What you do is you go to somebody's GitHub and you fork it. Now, this is very common. If anybody puts code on GitHub and it's public, you can fork it so you have a copy of the code, and now you can make modifications, and you're the boss of the new version you're making. But then you can make a pull request, which is an attempt to change the code. And what a lot of people do is they make it so any request to change code triggers testing, automatic testing immediately. So it automatically runs a bunch of tests to see if that's going to break anything, so that when they examine pull requests by the developer, they know that it didn't break anything, it ran the tests. But what that means is your pull request can include a new proposed test, and that test will run in the original workspace. So that's what they explain here. They say, if you're allowing someone to automatically run code inside your GitHub repository that came from them. So you're just handing remote code execution to people by design. So, but apparently this is commonly turned on. I'm not sure if it's the default or what it is, but I understand how you would think this would be good, because you don't think about abusing it. You think about how you're going to maintain the quality of your code base by making sure that nobody submits requests that fail tests. But anyway, that's what happened, and apparently this is still a problem even 5 years later. And that's how they hacked this Kubernetes product, because they left that pull request, they call it pwn request on, the thing that will automatically run code that came from the attacker. And here's another one. When people first started moving to the cloud, I guess it must be about 10 years ago, the number one concern of most companies is security, and they were right about that, and they should still be concerned. The problem is, even if you do move to the cloud with a major reputable provider like Microsoft or Amazon, the cloud is so complicated. I've been to training classes to secure the Amazon cloud, and it is really complicated. There are like 5 or 6 security products you have to pay for and configure, and there are dozens of different ways to configure the accounts and permissions. It is very hard to get all that stuff right, and people don't. And so here's Western Australia taking Microsoft 365, which is almost universally used by all major companies now, because it gives you Microsoft Office in the cloud. And yet I think they had a breach, and they decided to investigate all the Microsoft 365 products, of which there are an awful lot out there, and how secure they are. And what they found was, of course, that it's pretty bad. I mean, here blue means good, yellow means a minor problem, and red means a major problem. And you see, they audited 7 Western Australian government entities, which they don't want to identify exactly. And as you see, a lot of them have done things wrong. This reminds me of the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army, several years ago, defined cybersecurity standards, and they had cybersecurity audits every year. And I remember they were 98% out of compliance, and the next year they were 95% out of compliance, and I don't think it's a whole lot better yet. The problem is, it's not that hard to define what you ought to do, but it's very hard to actually do it. It costs money and time, and it takes training your staff, and that's the problem. Securing the cloud is not easy at all, and very few people do it successfully. All right, and so this was interesting. I never heard of this thing. There's a thing called repair mode in your Android phone, which is actually pretty awesome. If you have your phone fixed, you hand it to a repair person, how do you know they're not going to go in your social accounts and emails and see what you're doing? Now, there is a mode, which I didn't know about, called repair mode, which will let them fix your phone, but it won't run any of the local apps or let them see any of your files. So that sounds pretty awesome. It sounds like a pretty useful thing to do anytime you hand your phone to somebody. So I never heard of such a thing, and I don't know if they have it in iOS. It is an interesting feature. Anyway, that's interesting, a thing to know about. And this is a very interesting proposal. It's actually very simple. As you probably heard me talk about a lot, there's a huge problem with the electric power grid, with the data centers consuming a tons of power to run AI, and everybody getting electric cars consuming a bunch more power. We just don't have enough power. We don't have enough generating power. We don't have enough delivery system. But what these guys point out, which sounds pretty convincing, is that, the power stations are designed to meet the peak demand. And most of the hours of the day and night, they're not at peak. So you could just have batteries and storage units. You could run more power at the off-peak times and store it and save it, like Tesla Powerwalls and such. And they say you could, in fact, get a whole lot more energy out of the existing grid and structures if you just ran them more efficiently by implementing more storage. And that does sound pretty good. Another thing, of course, which I'm not sure they put in this article, but it's happened before, is you can make something like a data center that doesn't really have to run all the time, and you can run it in the off-peak hours and shut it down during the peak hours. So anyway, it's a good point. It makes it sound like by doing more careful planning and storage, you could probably get a whole lot more good out of the existing grid. And I think we're going to have to, because the requirements are really large and growing fast, and the grid is not growing fast enough to meet it. So this may be a productive direction to go. So I'm teaching FortiGate firewall certification down at San Jose State University, and so it gets my attention. FortiGate has been well known to have some serious vulnerabilities lately, and they're getting hacked. They point out this is happening a lot. One thing I've been pointing out in a lot of my podcasts and such is that in the last year or so, the number one way people hack into corporate networks is by hacking the firewalls and the VPN concentrators, which is a big change. It used to be they would do it by getting somebody to click a link and they would take over a Windows desktop, usually a low privilege Windows desktop, and then they would try to escalate privileges and pivot from there. But now they're taking over the edge devices. And the security of the edge devices is pretty much lacking. But anyway, now they talk about this, they're able to actually execute code on the device. And notice what they're doing is exploiting vulnerabilities that have been patched. These are known vulnerabilities, so if everybody was keeping their stuff fully updated, they would be not vulnerable to most of these, maybe all of them. But anyway, they're able to breach it, create a new administrator account, and then set up new firewall policies so they can traverse every zone in all directions. They then kept periodically checking to make sure the device was accessible. And this is interesting. This kind of behavior shows the specialization in the cybercrime community. There are people who hack into devices, and they're not the same people who exploit devices. They hack into devices, and then they're called access brokers. They rent that to people, say, we can get you in this, pay us money, and you can get in there, and then you can do whatever stuff, because it really is kind of a different activity to write the kind of attacks that take over a system once you're in, and the attacks that get in. So this is quite common that you have obviously different criminal teams doing different stages of the attack and handing it off to a different team. So all these guys did was hack in and then check to make sure it's still under their control and then not do anything else, because they're just the initial access broker, and I guess they're waiting for someone to pay the price to buy it. The most famous example of this was a big botnet that went on Microsoft Windows machines up to about 10 years ago. It went out for years and had like 5 updates over several years. And they kept predicting it was going to do some disastrous thing, but that disastrous thing never happened. They infected millions of Windows machines, and they kept on updating their malware to get more and more powerful control of those machines, but they never used it. So apparently, they were just an initial access broker that got control of those machines, and then they tried to sell it to somebody to use it for some kind of attack, and they never managed to sell it to anybody, and it just fell through. Just like in the above ground economy, there are a lot of half-baked products that come out, like the Microsoft phone intended for teenagers, where they made millions of them, sold them, and 6 weeks later just canceled the whole thing. There's a lot of like half-baked criminal activities that go partway through and then just sort of collapse without ever reaching a punchline. So as you probably know, a lot of when the pandemic hit, everybody got used to working from home, and nobody wants to go back to the office. Every company I know of has tried to get people to go back to the office, and mostly people just won't go back to the office. And if you demand that they come back to the office, they'll just quit and go work for somebody else. And they're showing, and again, they've done a study, and they've shown that in fact, people who stay at home and don't commute to the office are more productive and happier, and there really is very little reason to force them to come back to the office, which is what people say. It just seems to be a sort of meaningless power trip on the part of middle managers that want to feel like they can see you working. But many people have had these similar reports saying, This is what we promised people. I remember back in the 1960s, we said you won't have to drive to work, you won't have to pollute the place with the gas from your tailpipe. Everybody will just stay at home and work on the computer and remotely connect. And we really didn't have the tools to do that until recently when we had stuff like Zoom and Teams, but now we've got pretty good tools. You people are watching this class from home. You don't have to drive to college. This is more and more the trend of the world. But many companies are trying to prevent this and make everybody go back to the office, but they're pretty much finding that most of your employees will not come back. They would rather just quit because they really got not used to, being able to stay at home and see their dogs and their kids and whatever. And really, that's what we really should embrace to that and regard this as a success. But there's a need for the culture to catch up with it. So I'm amazed by this. This has got to end, I would think. It's incredible. I mean, I've been talking about it for a while. You probably heard me say it before. So Anthropic became the official AI for the U.S. Army, the U.S. military. And the U.S. military wanted to use it to surveil its own citizens because they have devices that collect an incredible amount of data, like flock cameras and others, and they can't have humans process all that data, so they wanted AI to process all the surveillance data to try to find the significant data there. And they also want to use it to build killer robots and systems that will just deploy lethal weapons and kill people with no human in the loop. And Anthropic does not want either of those things to be done. And they say that violates their terms of service and you can't use our product that way. And the Pentagon says, who are you to tell us what we can do? If we want to do it, we're going to do it. We are not going to let some vendor tell us what we can do with our military equipment. We're going to use it any way we want to. And so the logical, correct solution to this, obviously, is the Pentagon should say, well, we're going to end our contract with Anthropic and buy some other AI instead, since you guys won't let us use it the way we want to. That would be reasonable. But what the Trump administration is doing is putting Anthropic on the list of products which cannot be used in any government purchase at all. The supply chain risk where they put Huawei. So basically Anthropic would have to go out of business or leave the country or something because every company wants to do business with the U.S. government at some point, and they couldn't use Anthropic anywhere on their systems. And that's ridiculous because what Anthropic's complaint is not at all that extreme. Now, if Anthropic said, we're going to take all the data you give us and send it to China or Russia, that would be, this sort of thing would be justified. But that's not what they said. They just said you have to do reasonably productive, moral things with our product because we don't want to, our brand is associated with what looks like abusive, nasty government activity. And so, but they're sticking with this. I mean, it seems to me like the government is outrageously wrong, and Anthropic should be able to sue and claim, I would think, that they haven't done anything remotely to justify being put on the untrusted supply chain products list. But anyway, they seem to be pushing it. They really seem to be trying to do this, so I guess they're going to have to go to court and battle it out. Anyway, that's enough news. Let me stop this.